إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله.
So earlier we discussed some of the ways that the word enlightenment can be unhelpful, might be a bit of a loaded term, especially as a Muslim. And I believe some of the more helpful terms you used were words like Fitrah, Nur, Ishraq, these type of aspects of, being present and also being illuminated as a way to understand this term, enlightenment, as a Muslim. Could you expand upon that? Like, how would I even approach this topic as a Muslim?
Sure. Well, as you suggested, the contemporary term that's used, or the term that's used nowadays in Western culture to speak about this, is enlightenment. And this term is borrowed from Buddhist wisdom and from Buddhist thought and practice and realization. But it has its own connotations in secular mindfulness or just in contemporary spirituality, which may not be the same connotations that they would have in Islamic thought and practice and realization. You then mentioned, or what I mentioned about the Fitrah. That term is actually corresponds to certain meanings in Buddhist realization.
Oh, okay.
When the Buddhists speak of one's underlying nature, there's a famous statement that is almost like a Zen cone, that we must return to our original face before we were born. Right? So this is a statement said sometimes as a kind of cone, but it's a well-known Zen saying. The original face before we were born. This corresponds spiritually to what the Fitrah is.
Okay.
Right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the eternal religion, or the upright religion, the right religion, is the religion of the Fitrah, of the Deen al-Fitrah, to establish ourselves in this Fitrah, the Fitratullah, the way that Allah has made us, has intended. That Fitrah goes beyond our outer form, and it's the essential nature of the human being that is prior to our birth. So from this point of view, that corresponds in meaning to what the meaning is of the cone, to realize your unborn or your original face to before you were born. What is the look of your face to before you were born? That's the cone. It's a profound question. How did you look to before you were born? Something like this, immediately shocks your mind and will turn you inwards for the answer. It's your awareness, your consciousness is your original face, not my embodiment, as my outer physical face. That consciousness is connected to Fitrah. So the term Fitrah can be used in Islamic spirituality, in the Islamic understanding. In terms of enlightenment, or its function of establishing ourselves in our original nature, or in spiritual realization, I like this term spiritual realization, which is also a Western term, but actually a non-Buddhist term, because spiritual realization is more aligned with how Muslims would probably understand what's happening in spirituality. I mean, the term itself, spirituality, means matters of the spirit, and spirit, capital S, has so Muslims understand spirit as ruh, right, which comes ultimately from Allah, from the command of Allah, right? Right? That say that the ruh is from the command of my Lord. Right? It's from some other place, some more subtle, from the realm of the divine command that's not from this realm. So the ruh is something more subtle, not from here. And that's what spirit means in its original traditional Christian connotation. So when we speak of spiritual realization, very literally, that's realizing our spirit. Spiritual realization is realizing our spirit, coming back to our spiritual nature, our original nature, to before we were born into this realm. we were spirit. We were a spirit. So to return to our spirit is spiritual realization, is to realize our spirit, our ruh. And to return somehow to the command of our Lord to simply be, kun fayakun. So to return to being is really the goal of Islamic meditation, of Islamic spirituality, which at the root of our being is God's command, His amr, to be.
One of the things that fascinated me with your response was when you said, when we contemplate or when we return to the root of our being, there is God's command. Can you explain how the Sufis, or how in Islamic spirituality that's discussed?
Sure. For anything to actually exist and to be an existent in this realm or in any realm, God has to say to that thing, be, and therefore it is. Kun fayakun. In a very subtle sense, one can return to simply being in meditation. One can, by one's direct experience, return to the experience of pure being, to pure beingness. When we return there to the sense of I am, that I can be angry, I am sad, I am happy, I am spiritually realized. But prior to all of that, I am. This sense of being, this returning back to a sense of being, which is everyone's underlying experience, that we are simply being. There's something of a mystery there because we don't own that, but that's what we really are. To beyond having any role in this life, we are simply being, we're existing. That's more real in our direct experience than any other facet of our life. Whether that's the role that we have as a husband, as a father, as a son, as a co-worker, whatever it is, all of these are roles superimposed on our sense of being. So what's more real in that? What's secondary are these other roles. What's accidental, one could say, are these other roles, but what's substantial, what's essential is the sense of being. So if we return to our sense of being, we may be able to discover an intimacy with the divine presence here in our sense of being, because although at the same time we are not other than that, and we are more that sense of being than anything else, we also realize in the deeply spiritual sense that our sense of being is not even ours. We don't own being. God owns being. In fact, God is pure being. This is what I mean.
Recognizing God's being as pure being, that kind of sounds like fana, does it not?
In the Sufi sense?
Yes.
Fana in the Sufi sense. To one extent, yes. When we return to our sense of beingness, to we're not anything else, to we're not who we thought we were. Because in a sense, if I return to my sense of beingness and you return to your sense of beingness, are these two distinct senses of beingness, or is this a shared quality of beingness? And if it is, then where does that come from? And one could take even a further step back and say that of course is from Allah. That's from God, for God is ultimate being. Al-wujud al-mutlaq, right? Absolute being. So pure being, pure existence comes from God, as al-hayy, who is the ever-living. So there's a lot of Islamic precedent to speak of terms like this. So when we return to our sense of pure beingness, as we're returning, everything else is falling away. In terms of our attachments, our identifications, our sense of what we are, as we return back to simply pure beingness. You could call it a kind of emptying. this process and the return back to this sense of pure beingness is like fana, is like the state or the experience of fana, which really means the perishing of all things, or the perishing of our sense of self, or of our sense of a self that's apparently separate or autonomous from other things, from reality. Once this falls away, this is fana, and this really is one of the meanings of the verse. Kullu man alayha fan, that all things are perishing, are in a state of fana, are perishing. Even your sense of self. وَيَبَقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. And the face or the presence of your Lord abides and remains. Right? In paraphrase, that presence of your Lord, وَيَبَقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ, is really this the face of God, the presence of God as experienced as pure being. So as you return to pure being, you dissolve, you fall away. This is fana. And as you bear witness to the ever abiding presence of your Lord, of God's presence, that witnessing is abidance or baqa. This is really what the Sufis mean, and it's right in the Quran. So the doctrine of the Sufis takes these verses to their full spiritual realization.
لا إله إلا الله 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 لا إله